Okay. Bom dia a todos. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another webinar by Siena. My name is Nicola, and with me is Ana Matias, my colleague at Siena, the NGO behind this webinar. So Catarina is joining now. Hola, Catarina. Hi. Thanks for joining us. So I'll just do a brief introduction about the webinar, and then we'll go towards Catarina's presentation. So a quick word on Siena for those of you who might not know it. Siena is a Portuguese NGO focused on marine conservation. We work mainly in questions like sustainable fisheries, aquaculture, marine protected areas, marine litter, and obviously environmental awareness. And this last one is the reason for us to do this series of webinars that we've been developing ever since the pandemic started, and we saw that this was a good way to reach people in their homes and try to spread awareness about important ocean issues. So that's the reason we are here today. A quick word about the webinar structure. So we're going to have a presentation by Catarina, followed by a Q&A session. So we invite all the participants to drop any questions or comments in the Q&A box, which you will find on the bottom of your Zoom screen. And you can write anything, any question or comment there that we'll post to Catarina later on. Even during the presentation, you're free to do this. So please write any questions or comments you may have. The webinar is being recorded, so we'll make this available on our YouTube page, and we'll send it to all the participants once it's uploaded. So our guest today, Catarina Frazão Santos, is a research scientist at the University of Lisbon and a lecturer. She's a researcher at MARE and a visiting researcher at Nova SPA. Her research focuses on ocean planning, management, and policy, which aims to develop interdisciplinary work to support ocean sustainability. She's currently leading a team of international scientists on a project called Ocean Plan on how marine spatial planning can be affected by and adapt to global climate change. The main reason that we wanted to invite Catarina was because of an article she co-authored last year called Integrated Climate Change in Ocean Planning, and that's the title of our webinar today. So thank you very much, Catarina, for joining us. Anna, any other things before we move on?
I don't think so. I will paste here the link for Catarina's paper, which is quite interesting, and just to say that we have already almost 50 people in the room, and one of the reasons we are making these webinars is because we can have a lot of people from around the world, which is great for us. And that's it. I think we can start. Catarina, can you share your screen? Let's see if we can make it.
I'm getting a message saying that the host is able.
Yes, you are. Sorry.
Classic, but easily solved.
Can you do it now?
Okay, I can.
Cool.
All right, thank you, Catarina.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah.
Okay. So thank you very much for the introduction and for the invitation to be here and to talk a bit about this paper that we published last year. So with no further ado, I will start. So the first thing that I would like to say is that this is clearly a collaborative work. This paper was developed under Project Ocean Plan, as Nick said, is about marine spatial planning under climate change. And it counts with a lot of people, great people from different countries and different institutions. So I have to thank them all for all the inputs and all the hard work that led to this publication. So I will start by addressing marine spatial planning or ocean planning in general. There are many names to address this approach, this instrument. The most commonly used one is marine or maritime spatial planning, known as MSP. But there are several others, such as sea use management, marine spatial management, comprehensive ocean zoning, and also some terms that people sometimes confuse with marine spatial planning, but that are not the same as, for example, conservation planning or MPA's planning or integrated coastal management. So basically what ocean planning marine spatial planning is a practical way to organize the use of the ocean space and the interactions between ocean uses in order to balance the need for development and environmental protection. And when we are talking about ocean uses, we are talking about fisheries, aquaculture, tourism, maritime transportation, seabed mining, and also about marine conservation, because although this is not economic activity, it is a use of the ocean space and has to be considered in marine spatial planning processes. And sometimes when people think about ocean planning, marine spatial planning, they think about maps and zoning schemes. But marine spatial planning is much more than that. Sorry. It is a complex process with different stages, from pre-planning to the analysis of current conditions, of future conditions, the selection of alternatives, the analysis of spatial management alternatives, the selection of one, obtaining financial support, organizing stakeholder participation throughout the entire process, and then, of course, all the challenges of monitoring, revising, and starting the cycle all over again. So it is a very complex process. And still, one of the most commonly used definitions for MSP, actually from one of the most commonly used guides by UNESCO, describes MSP as a public process of analyzing and allocating the spatial and temporal distribution of human activities in the ocean in order to achieve ecological, economic, and social objectives that are usually specified through a political process. And because of this focus on these three dimensions, ecological, economic, and social, MSP has been recognized as a very important tool to support the sustainable use of the ocean and governance goals such as the SDG 14. But marine spatial planning is far from being a new thing. It started in the 80s with the original zoning plan of the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park in Australia, and a few years later with the idea of marine functional zoning in China. And since then, it has expanded all over the world. It has gained momentum globally, and it's now under development in about 75 nations that represent half of all coastal states. And you can see in the image that not all countries are in the same stage of MSP. The majority is still in early stages of development, but some countries already have plans approved, implemented, and even revised. And the expectations is that this number keeps expanding for the following decades because of global initiatives such as the Marine Spatial Planning Global by UNESCO and the European Commission, or the EU Maritime Spatial Planning Directive that asks member states to have their ocean plans implemented by this month, or even by international projects that foster the development of MSP, such as the PADDLE project that focuses on tropical countries. And if anyone is interested in this, this is a very recent paper that is in Press in Marine Policy. It was written by Charles Ehler, one of the co-authors of our paper, and it summarizes the last 2 decades of progress in MSP, and it's very interesting. So I leave the link here, and I can share it later also. Still, despite all of this global acceptance and uptake of MSP, it still faces a number of challenges that compromise many times its implementation and its approval. And these range from political frameworks to the actual ability to engage and involve stakeholders throughout the entire process. The consideration, and this is something that is getting more and more attention, of the human dimensions and the use of the inclusion of social values and cultural values in the planning process, and also the baseline challenge of ensuring environmental sustainability, the right balance between use and protection. But a challenge that is cross-cutting to all of this and that has a significant potential to increase to aggravate all these other challenges is climate change. And climate change has been also in the international agenda for many years now, but probably never as much as today. 2 years ago, the IPCC published a special report focused on the ocean and the cryosphere under a changing climate. And this idea that we cannot protect the ocean without solving climate change, but that we cannot solve climate change without protecting the ocean is also getting more and more attention now. And we do see that our ocean is getting warmer, more acidic, with less oxygen. We are losing ice, extreme events are being more intense and more frequent. And all of these leads to changes in ecosystem structure and functioning. In the ocean, species are moving to the poles or to deeper layers in the ocean. And there's also a trend of changes in biomass with significant losses. And all of these changes in ecosystem structure and functioning will affect the provision of ecosystem services, benefits to human populations. And this will affect human uses and activities that rely on these services, such as fisheries, aquaculture, tourism, or marine conservation. But they are not the only one. Other ocean uses that do not depend on marine ecosystem services will also be affected by changing ocean conditions, like changes in waves and winds patterns, or increased danger at sea. And this danger at sea will also affect other uses that have infrastructures, such as offshore aquaculture or fishing vessels. And of course, that not all ocean uses will be affected the same way. Some are globally more sensitive to climate impacts. And of course, that there will also be regional variations. So the same use will not be affected in Brazil or in Norway, for example. But all of these will definitely lead to changes in the way humans use the ocean and changes in the way that humans benefit from the ocean. This was a cartoon drawn by visual artist Bas Kohler, specifically to our paper, where we asked him to try to depict MSP in a changing world with clear references to the Arctic that I'm not sure that you can see here, but there's a polar bear on the bottom of the picture. This is also in the paper. And so we will have, for sure, potentially new conflicts between ocean uses, new conflicts between uses and the environment, that is, new environmental or pressures, new cumulative pressures, and legal issues, because generally ocean uses to take place in the ocean require use permits. And because these three are at the core of marine spatial planning, balancing uses and conflicts between uses in the environment and these legal issues, marine spatial planning will definitely be affected by a changing climate. So what is the issue here? What is the problem, if this is clear? Is that in practice, climate change is often neglected as a factor in marine spatial planning processes. And why does this matter? Because if we do not consider climate change when developing ocean plans, chances are that ocean planning will not be able to ensure and really contribute to a sustainable use and preservation of the ocean and its resources. So this was the premise for our paper. We wanted to understand why this happened and to highlight potential solutions. And here you have the link to a behind the paper article that we wrote, where we explained some of the funny facts when developing the paper, if anyone wants to take a look, and also how the idea for the paper was created. So we revised scientific literature, and we found about 150 studies that addressed both climate change and marine spatial planning. But when analyzing them, we saw that only a much smaller subset of 60 papers did establish the connection between marine spatial planning and climate change, either through a detailed discussion or even only with brief references. And some key topics stood out, and these pertain to, when analyzing those 60 papers, these pertain to the reasons for the lack of integration, how to integrate climate impacts, so how to support adaptive planning, the need to recognize the challenge, and how MSP could be a solution and contribute to climate adaptation and mitigation. And so we found a number of reasons that explained why MSP was not commonly integrated in MSP, why climate change was not commonly integrated in MSP. And it was interesting because although a lot of papers mentioned that to be viable, relevant, and useful in the long term, MSP would need to address and integrate climate effects. Those were not really integrated in many cases. So the first reason that we found, and the first reason pointed out by some authors, was that climate change was not integrated because MSP conceptually arose without references to climate change, and planning for the future use of the ocean and not the current use of the ocean was a recent concept. However, when we checked the UNESCO MSP guidelines, we saw that analyzing future conditions is one of the key steps, and this document is already 10 years old. So that could not be the only reason to explain this lack of integration. And so other authors said that this was because the majority of management approaches, including MSP, were largely static and did not account for the dynamic nature of the ocean or its uses. They were like images instead of being videos, and they didn't have a lot of margin for dynamics. Another reason pertained to planning being reactive, responding to problems only as they arise, and not in advance, not being proactive. And that could happen for a variety of reasons, because of financial resources and limitations in financial resources, because considering climate impacts could represent additional initial costs in a setting where costs are already high, to develop scenario analysis, vulnerability assessments, or modeling tools. It could also be because there would be a need for new skills in the planning team, or simply because of the human tendency to avoid behavioral change until impacts strongly affect well-being, or also because of the uncertainty that is linked to future climate predictions. And finally, there were also some studies that identified the problem of some nation-specific institutional frameworks and power allocation and power relations that hindered the effective implementation of adaptive governance and adaptive law. But despite of the reason that led to the lack of integration of climate change in MSP, we found that the first step to really develop climate-smart marine spatial plans is to recognize the challenge. So we need to recognize the importance of this topic, of this challenge or threat to MSP in order to ensure that it is really incorporated in policies and regulations. Because what happened many times is that when ocean plans and policies address climate change in a general way and a vague way, what happens is that the challenge is not properly addressed, is very superficially mentioned only. And so for this, we would need several tools or ways to actually integrate the climate dimension into ocean plans. And once again, there are several options. In all of these cases, there is never a one-size-fits-all solution, and there will never be. And one of these approaches to integrate climate information into MSP is by using spatial use scenarios and visioning processes. And indeed, this is one of the key steps in developing marine spatial plans. And what we can see is that when building scenarios, climate change projections and impacts can and should be included and considered to support the selection of a preferred management alternative. And we found examples of this, for example, in Netherlands, spatial use scenarios were developed and integrated with sea level rise scenarios, projections. And also in the Western Tropical Pacific Ocean, there was a creation of visions for MSP, where climate change scenarios, both optimistic and catastrophic, were developed by stakeholders. But there were also cases where there was a gap between the will to represent future use and future impacts. So there was a recognition and the will to do it, but there was a lack of ability, technical ability, for example, to do so in practice. So these are challenges that also need to be addressed. A second way of integrating climate change is by using modeling and mapping tools. So these have been used to address changes both in ecosystems and in human activities that rely on them. And frequently, global change projections are used to predict species range alterations and thus mapping ecological boundaries, or to identify future changes in fisheries, aquaculture, or shipping, for example. And this is a very recent article by Malin Pinsky et al., published in the end of 2020, where they used 10,000 projections for marine animals around North America to test the impact of climate-driven species redistribution and how this could affect ocean plants. And there are other examples. For example, the Symphony tool that supports MSP in Sweden considers climate change, and also the Access tool in the Arctic has a lot of different scenarios that also include climate change. Finally, there's another approach to integrate climate impacts in MSP, and this pertains to vulnerability assessments and risk analysis. And here we are talking both about ecological vulnerability and social vulnerability. Indeed, MSP needs knowledge not only on where the changes occur, but also where the consequences of such changes are most significant. And these analyses can assist on that. And we have examples of Maria, French Polynesia, where an assessment of the social ecological vulnerability of small-scale fisheries was performed to inform national MSP. Or in the United States, where the assessment of cumulative risks of human activities in marine habitats was conducted to the Northeast Atlantic and Mid-Atlantic planning regions to support ocean planning, or even in the European Union, where the assessment of the exposure and vulnerability of ocean economy sectors in coastal countries could be used to support MSP. But if on one hand we need to integrate climate impacts, we also need to support, at least to some extent, the adaptation and flexibility of marine spatial planning itself, because there will always be a certain amount of things that we cannot plan for, not to say a big amount, and so we need to be able to adapt to unexpected changes. And once again, there are different approaches to do this. I will only highlight 2 or 3, but the paper has more. As you can see, we have, we have a long table with potential pathways to support the inclusion and adaptation of climate change in MSP in the paper. So you can also check that, and with a short description of the approach and a number of real examples that we found in the analyzed studies. But going back, so adaptive management is one of these approaches, of course. It is an approach based on the concept of learning by doing and adjusting actions according to the results that we get. And conceptually, it is embedded in marine spatial planning, is one of the key steps, the 9th or 10th step of the process. And there's also a guide, also a UNESCO guide, specifically on how to evaluate and then adapt ocean plans. However, one of the problems of adaptive management, as mentioned before, is that many times there is the inability of governments and jurisdictional frameworks to incorporate change. And this needs to be changed, and there's a lot of people arguing for this and analyzing this. So adaptive law, adaptive governance, they have a very high potential to help here as well. Another approach pertains to anticipatory zoning, and this is basically the allocation of areas to a given use in advance or to the exclusion of a use in advance and in anticipation of climate effects. So this fosters flexibility because it allows entities to make decisions before uses are in place, avoiding legal problems, avoiding costs, and anticipating conflicts, and many times prioritizing ocean uses before oceans are in place. And specific cases for this are the Arctic, where we found the closure of areas to commercial fishing in anticipation of sea ice loss, using the status of marine protected areas, or in the Netherlands, where there were areas designated for sand extraction to support climate adaptation, namely regarding sea level rise. And I will only address this one more. That is dynamic ocean management, which has been more and more an approach that has been mentioned, and there's a lot of research going on this topic. And this is basically a planning approach that relies on near real-time data and allows for management boundaries to be dynamic in response to shifts in ocean uses and resources. So not only does it provide flexibility, but it promotes an increased efficiency in ocean use because it allocates uses to more appropriate and limited areas that change in time. And actually examples of this are fisheries management in the US and Australia, offshore aquaculture in Tasmania, marine mammal protection in the US and Canada. And very recently also, there was a paper published in Science, also co-authored by one of our co-authors, Larry Crowther, about the potential for a dynamic ocean management in the high seas, in this case for marine protected areas. And as I mentioned before, there are more approaches that are available and more examples if you want to take a look in the paper. And I will go to the final topic that we highlighted, because otherwise we could be here the entire afternoon. And this topic pertains to MSP as a solution. So the contribution that MSP can make to climate adaptation and mitigation. And indeed, many authors and articles also mention that when developed with explicit climate-related considerations, MSP could support climate adaptation actions and play an important role in climate mitigation. So this is very important when we are in an age where we want to really find ways to protect the ocean and to minimize the effects of climate change. And how can MSP do this? Many ways again, many pathways to do this. One of them pertains to minimizing climate impacts by increasing ecosystem resilience. And there are several entries for this. One of them is that MSP can provide a holistic, integrated, and cross-sectoral approach to manage ocean use. And delivering this comprehensive view of the management area is very important to support climate adaptation actions, because when we are selecting actions, a good adaptation action for a sector can be maladaptive to others. So we do need to have this systemic view of what we are managing, and MSP can really contribute to that. Another way is by regulating cumulative pressures from local stressors. And again, this is a recent paper. This one is from 2021 by Elena Gysi, which is also one of our co-authors. And what the paper mentions is that MSP really has this ability to contribute to control to local human stressors and pressures and regulate the exacerbating effects that are induced by the combination of climate impacts and these human stressors. So MSP can also play a key role here. And of course, that ocean plans can also allocate areas for conservation of important species and habitats, and also to climate refugia. And there are a paper by Rilov from last year as well that really identifies climate refugia, their inclusion in marine plans as a promising approach to minimize climate impacts. And finally, MSP can play a role. This is not as direct as the other, but it's so important, and is that MSP can contribute to empower human populations and increase social resilience to climate change by raising awareness to climate impacts, by promoting ocean literacy, and also, and very importantly, by fostering participation of local communities in identifying, in designing solutions. And this is a very important, less evident, but very important way of how MSP can also contribute to minimize climate impacts. But MSP can also contribute to climate mitigation, and thus the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. And the most immediate way, or more clear way that we can anticipate this, is by supporting the expansion of marine renewable energy, promoting a more efficient allocation of space to the installation of wind, wave, current energy developments, decreasing conflicts with other uses, and also controlling environmental impacts. But MSP can also support blue carbon capture and storage by designing areas for the conservation of blue carbon ecosystems, or also by allocating space to other initiatives that focus on ocean-based carbon dioxide removal, for example, like the large-scale production of seaweed. And finally, MSP can contribute to reduce greenhouse gas emissions because by being a spatial management instrument, it can prioritize the use of certain areas to uses and activities that tend to use eco-efficient over zero emission power sources, or more having a more strong position. It can even limit the available space to polluting activities that do not engage in decreasing the rate of greenhouse gas emissions. So there are a lot of pathways here that MSP can support and help being implemented. And all of these have to be interconnected and work together. And as I said before, there is not a one-size solution to fit all cases. So it will result in a combination of different approaches. This graphic is not from the paper, it's from a book chapter that we are developing, but it exemplifies this in a clear way. So we first need to recognize the challenge. Then we need to integrate climate impacts, at the same time support adaptive and flexible planning, and taking all of this into consideration, explore MSP as a solution and implement climate actions. And there are reasons for hope, because although in practice only few plans address climate change, attention is increasing to this topic. And in the past 2 years, there were a lot of events that show this. We had a session on marine spatial planning, on a congress related to climate effects on the ocean. The IC's working group on marine spatial planning and coastal zone management published, has a term of reference that intends to include climate change in marine spatial planning. This was very interesting in the MSP Forum initiative that belongs to the Marine Spatial Planning Global Initiative. In the last forum, there was one workshop that didn't have a topic, so participants would choose, and the choice of participants was on on planning for climate change. So this shows the attention that is growing on the topic. WWF published a position paper on developing ecosystem-based ocean plans, where it clearly mentions climate change. And more recently, in the final Ocean Gulf conference, Christina Gerge mentioned that we really need, in her keynote speech, that this is one of the lines for development is to moving towards climate smart MSP, and namely in the high seas as well. And that recent paper that studied species distribution modeling for climate change, support ocean planning, also showed that while providing substantial benefits, climate smart ocean plans may require few trade-offs, so this is good news. And still with all of these, we need to further discuss this topic. We need to discuss it with policymakers, lawmakers, planners, local communities, the scientific community, and we need to really find a way to go ahead and go beyond words and really ensure that ocean plans include climate change. And under Ocean Plan, we also wanted to contribute to this, so we created an online survey on the topic. We extended the deadline until the end of this month, so if anyone still wants to participate, you can do it. Thank you. We acknowledge all the people that did it already. We have almost 119 responses from 50 different countries. And with all of these, we will put together a report that will be discussed with experts. And the intention is to create some sort of decision support tool where you can see if you are creating your ocean plan, country, or if you are revising it and you want to include climate change in a better way, you can see the different examples, the challenges and the benefits that different case studies had, and so contribute to this inclusion. And so thank you, everyone. This was more or less what I had to say in a short summary of our paper and of what we are doing right now. And you have the links to the survey and to the project and to the paper as well here. And thank you very much.
So, Catarina, thanks a lot. I would ask you to stop sharing your screen so that we can place all the three of us in the. I think I can do it. Okay, that's it. So thanks a lot for your presentation. I think your last slides were very clear about the need for more people to be involved and the need for more work to be done. This seems quite a complex and a big thing to do. I would encourage everyone to leave their questions in the Q&A box. Just let me tell you that I love your cartoons. I think they are amazing. I think the first one that you mentioned, that was the big one, where the illustrator had all the activities. That one is really good. I would like to know where can I find it, because I think it's great. I do have a question, and maybe I can start with one of my questions while people are typing their own. You mentioned that MSP can help solve conflicts in certain areas. Could you elaborate a bit more on that? Because actually that's something that we as NGOs often say, that we need really strong MSP and really strong management plans and implementation plans, so that when a new activity comes, we have the place to put it, and we can minimize the conflicts between one or two or three activities. So could you elaborate a bit more on that?
Yes, sure. And just to let you know, the cartoon that you mentioned, it is in the paper itself.
Oh, okay. I didn't see. Okay.
And I can send you a link where, so we met this visual artist, Bas Kohler, in a symposium about the effects of climate change on the ocean, organized by ICES and PICES and FAO and UNESCO. And he has a lot of great cartoons that I used in the presentation to illustrate a lot of challenges. So there's a link for all of those cartoons, and I can share it with you and anyone who's interested as well.
Yeah, if you could, yeah. So, thank you.
So about marine spatial planning and the ability to decrease conflicts. So ideally, marine spatial planning is about, as you said, the distribution of uses in space. So you have a certain management area, marine management area, and ideally you will consult with everyone who's using the area and everyone who's interested in using the area in the future. And you will discuss with them which areas are really needed, which areas are the best ones for a certain activity like fisheries or aquaculture or tourism. And then you try to find a balance and a compromise. So it's, of course, everyone has to compromise to some extent, because if everyone says, I want all the area, that will not work to anyone. But usually in the processes, people get to a solution. They understand that, okay, I would use all the space, but that specific area is really, really needed. So, okay, this one will be for fisheries. And you will do this in a discussion process, a collaborative process, to get to a spatial use map of the distribution of uses. This, of course, is the ideal solution. Yeah. Many times it doesn't happen like this, either because some sectors are not willing to give some, to compromise really, to give space to other uses, or because some sectors do not participate. But overall, it's a very enriching process because people understand better the problems and the difficulties of the other sectors when everyone is discussing in the same table. And the solution will be one that all people are more comfortable with, or the most people, the majority. It's not very different of what you have, for example, inside an MPA. When you are making a marine protected areas planning, marine conservation planning, you are doing the same in a different scale. You are putting together all the people that work, that use the area, and then you are trying to get them to talk to each other and to get to a optimized solution. So marine spatial planning is this in a different scale, and clearly with different objectives, because you can have marine spatial plans that are more focused on conservation, but you can also have marine spatial plans that are more focused on blue growth and economic development. So, but the idea is the same.
This can even lead the way to co-management, no? True co-management.
Yes, yes. Ideally, that would be the idea. Yeah. And it's also important to bear in mind that you have marine special plans with very different dimensions. For example, in Portugal, we have a marine special plan, the situation plan, that is applicable to the entire maritime area under Portuguese jurisdiction. So we are talking about 4 million square kilometers, of course, with different sections. But you can also have marine special plans that are focused on a marine protected area. For example, in Galapagos, that's how it works in Ecuador. You have the marine special plan corresponds to the marine reserve. So it's a completely different scale. And the actors are different. So the co-management will be different.
Of course, yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Catarina. Very interesting stuff. Before we go to the participants' questions, maybe one more question from our side, because obviously we're also always very curious about all of this. And I would maybe ask about the ocean dynamic planning, because that sounded like a really interesting topic that I hadn't heard of before. So my question would be, you mentioned, so obviously to have near real-time changes in the way you divide up maritime space. What kind of data would you be using into that? Would it be just abiotic and biotic data, or would it be like live data from the different entities that explore the area? What would it look like?
I can give you an example. One of the initiatives where dynamic ocean management was developed pertained to fisheries management in the US. And so what they did was that fishermen every day, they reported. So the thing was that they went to fish for a particular species, and then they had bycatch. But the bycatch that they had was of a protected species. Okay, so they couldn't. So in the end, what really used to happen before this approach is that they had to stop fishing in that area. With dynamic ocean management, what they did was that every day they reported the areas where they had bycatch of that vulnerable species. And so and based on that, managers created a grid of areas where fishermen should go and of where fishermen shouldn't go to avoid the protected species. So, and in that case, what happened was that the fishery didn't have to close. And so it was much more efficient, and at the same time, it helped to protect the environment. So basically, in that case, they use real data provided by fishermen on a daily basis. But there are examples also of using projections of sea surface temperature to understand the areas where sea turtles used to hang out, and avoid those areas, again, to protect the species. So it can be different type of data, but it requires real data, and that is why it has been used in a more sectoral basis, like fisheries or maritime transportation with whales. And so it's more difficult to have global data that can be used in a more global way.
Yeah, cool. We could see it as like an initial way to implement it, looking, for example, just on fisheries, and then just try to build around that with different sectors. That would be very interesting. Yeah. Mm-hmm. This actually just to finish, this goes very much in parallel with something we were discussing in last week's webinar about sharks, because we have a problem of bycatch in the Azores, for example, but it's in a very particular period of the year, and something like that, I mean, seems almost too simple to not do, and unfortunately we're not doing it. So yeah, very interesting stuff. Thank you. I will just remind the participants to please pose your questions in the Q&A. That's going to be easier for us to go along the questions. Thank you.
Were you going to add anything else, Catarina?
Yes, I was going to say that there are teams in the US that are working specifically on dynamic ocean management, and they have developed further their initial approaches. And there is, I think, one of the latest tools that they had is the EchoCast, if I'm not wrong. And I think that they somewhat applied it to Açores. I'm not sure to which species or to which sector, but I remember reading something about its application to the Azores. So it could be interesting to see that and to make that connection.
Thank you. So we are receiving a lot of questions now, which is great. The next question is from Jacqueline Varela. He's saying he's from Cape Verde. Hello, Jacqueline. And he's saying that he intends to give his contribution to his country in implementing MSP. And then he adds how important MSP could be for a small island state like Cape Verde in this case.
Well, I would say that it could be very, very important, because usually small island states are the ones that have a bigger connection with the ocean, right? And usually have very large AEZs. So marine spatial planning is not the solution for everything. I think we need to be realists about this, and it depends on how it is developed. But if properly developed, if considering all the knowledge that we have on the area that we are managing, if involving all the relevant actors, all the people that are affected by and interested in that area, and if we do have a good communication between all of these actors, we can achieve the co-management solutions that we were mentioning earlier and really find a way to support a sustainable ocean use. So I do think that marine spatial planning, even though it has limitations and there are challenges, it is a very good way to put all the people together, communicating, talking, and trying to reach one common solution. So for sure, I would say that it's very important for Cape Verde.
All right, thank you. Regarding what you were saying about including marine renewables in this question of maritime spatial planning, Patrick Murphy submitted a question, thank you Patrick, saying that he was confused to the perception that the introduction of offshore wind farms is good for the marine environment. And could you give some links to scientific papers that validate these views? So you can obviously have a quick response, but you can then give us some links to introduce when we send out the material to the participants.
Okay, no, I can for sure identify a lot of papers on marine spatial planning and renewable energies, but maybe I didn't explain myself very well. Of course, that renewable energies have impacts on the environment. They do. And there are a number of studies trying to identify all the cumulative impacts in the marine environment and everything around that. But the point that I was trying to make, and literature addresses this, is that the expansion of offshore renewables in the ocean can contribute to clean energy, and in that sense, it does contribute to a decrease in global greenhouse gases emissions. So it's a way to contribute to climate mitigation, and it's something that it's really serious and has to be on the table if we do want to decrease the emissions that we currently have. But of course, that renewables themselves, they have impacts on the ocean. So it's always a balance between our goals and the trade-offs between one approach and the other, one impact and the other, one solution and the other.
Yes, I think it's always a matter of compromising, no? And a matter of choosing which one is less harmful for the environment and for the future generations, probably. Yeah. The next question is from Nicole, and Nicole is saying, Catarina, thanks a lot for your very intriguing presentation. When looking at the recent spatial plan for German EEZ in the North Sea, I really struggle with the massive expansion of offshore wind energy, which is actually a static form of ocean use. So how can we solve this problem with regard to the goal of getting a more flexible marine management? I would be really interested in your opinion on that topic. Can I just add something? If Catarina lets us, we are going to share our email when we send the recording of the session and the information of the session. We can share your email, Catarina, and then if people want to engage in further conversation with you, maybe they can do it. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yes, for sure. So that's a very $1 million question because it's how do you put together infrastructures that are not mobile with the need for flexibility, and for sure that it's very difficult to achieve. In the worst case scenario, of course, we could talk about relocating infrastructures, moving them, but of course that has a lot of costs and legal issues attached to it. So it's not straightforward how to connect flexible, dynamic MSP with infrastructures like those. And when we talk about these type of infrastructures, we are talking about renewables, but we can also talk about seabed mining infrastructures, oil platforms, and things like that. In that case, it would be probably more about anticipating areas that could be more prone to change and avoiding those areas to those types of infrastructures. But in that case, we would be talking about a maritime area that is not yet being exploited, because when you have places like in Germany where you already have those infrastructures in place, it's more difficult to ensure that that ability to change. I'm not sure if I entirely answered your question. I can, because I don't think there's a one straightforward answer for that, but I can for sure send you some links to some papers on the topic.
Yeah, thank you, Catarina. So the next question is going to be about something that we kind of talked about for big predators, but still we can ask the question. So Agatha asked, thank you, Agatha, for your question. What do you think about dynamic marine protected areas? So would it be, for example, for migratory species like cetaceans, would it be a good tool for biodiversity conservation?
I definitely think they would be. They could be a great tool for conservation of marine species. Of course, for migratory species and species with high mobility, they would be very useful. But not just that, for those ones, because of all the changes and all the relocation and redistribution of species, not only due to climate change, but also to climate change, having that ability to move the boundaries of the marine protected area is perfect. The big challenge here is how to get the data, as we were mentioning earlier, to support the definition of that boundary. So there's a lot to be optimized, but there's also more and more data being available every day. And with all the technological advances, I guess that is something that we can really aim for. And it's a key solution to help on the flexibility and adaptive capacity of these tools, of these instruments that really need to ensure.
I think the keyword for this webinar is adaptive, because it's something that has come across multiple times, and it's true because this is all very new, and you said it yourself in the beginning of your presentation that the very concept of marine spatial planning doesn't include climate change, and that doesn't include its possibilities. So I think that adaptiveness is for sure the message to take home. The next question is from Miguel, and is saying the big MSP we are talking about, and in order to achieve the main goal should be global, right? Meaning it has to be assumed by the governments of most of the countries as mandatory, as in a global agreement. And then MSP needs to include fiscalization tools to ensure the implemented global plan or deeply integrated regional plans is being applied and followed. Are there some efforts from international community in this direction? What do you think?
Okay, so that's a question with a lot of questions.
I think you can read it now in your screen. You can now. If you want, I can.
No, I
break it down.
No. I think. Thanks, but it has a lot of questions, but it will also have a lot of answers. So the thing is, marine spatial planning so far has been developed in national waters. Okay, so there are some initiatives on the development of marine spatial plans in international waters, but they are not formally known as marine spatial planning initiatives. And the key aspect here is, as Miguel said, about enforcement. How can you enforce something in international waters is much more difficult. Even in national waters, if you consider large EEZs like the Portuguese one, it's still very hard. And saying this, yes, marine spatial planning on concept has to have the mechanisms and the ability to enforce and to monitor and to see if things are really happening as they are supposed to. In practice, this is many times difficult because we are talking about areas where people do not live, right? We are used to seeing the ocean only in a few nautical miles, so it's hard to enforce in the open ocean. Still, there are, of course, efforts on that direction. About a general effort for a global marine spatial planning initiative, there are global initiatives to support the development of marine spatial plans, following integrated principles and common guidelines and common objectives. And this is very important because we don't have boundaries in the ocean, right? So you are in the Portuguese EEZ, and then you go to the Spanish EEZ, and there's no type of physical border between them. So the decisions that are made in Portugal will affect neighboring waters, and so. And because also for that, there are a lot of international instruments that intend to support the quality of the waters, the consultation of neighboring countries. So in a nutshell, there are not a global marine spatial plan. There are, however, the intention that marine spatial plans from different countries are well interconnect, and that transboundary effects are considered when developing them. Okay. But as everything, this is an ongoing process, and more countries are now paying attention to MSP. So the attention to those issues and to the need of that global view and global goals is on the table.
Yeah, thank you. The next question says, how can, well, the person who wrote MPA, but I'm going to assume it's MPS. If I'm mistaken, please let me know. So how can MPS help? This goes actually in the way that you were speaking. So how can MPS help mitigate the potential conflicts regarding marine resources projected reorganizations? So, for example, how can it help with transnational reallocation of important fisheries resources?
Okay. So to be sure that I got it right, so how can MSP contribute and help when fishery resources move from one country to another?
So preventing conflicts, assuming that you know that some resources are going to move beyond national boundaries.
So that's one of the reasons why approaches such as anticipatory zoning could be really important. If you can somehow, to some extent, predict where resources will be moving to, where they are now, and where they will move to in the future, you can anticipate that change, and you can start dialogues with neighboring countries right now. You can define a way, a plan for that scenario. Okay, we have fishery here. It will move. It will go to your water. How we will be dealing with this? And marine spatial planning creates a forum where people can discuss the topic. So, for example, in the EU, all the member states with coastal areas have to have their marine spatial plans implemented this month. So all of them will be aware of these issues, and they know who to talk to in the other country. So marine spatial planning has this ability to theoretically put the people, it's more easy for people to discuss and communicate on this particular topic and to reach a solution in the end. So it will not give you an immediate answer, but it will facilitate the discussion of the solution that we need to have up front.
So Catarina, I know you have a lecture to give in 20 minutes, so I will try to keep it short for you to have at least 5 to 10 minutes between these and the next one. So I would say we can ask 2 more questions, and I'm going to choose this one from George. And I don't know if you have an opinion on this, but this is interesting, and this is usually something that comes when we talk about the Portuguese EEZ. So he's asking, the Portuguese EEZ is a bit of a fallacy. Indeed, it is huge, but it is impractical for Portuguese GDP and associated resources. What do you reckon about this? Do you have any opinion on this?
I missed a part of I stopped hearing you for a minute. Sorry.
I can repeat it. Yeah, sure. So George is saying Portuguese EEZ is a bit of a fallacy. Indeed, it is huge, but it is impractical for Portuguese GDP and associated resources. What do you think about this?
Well, I don't even know what to answer that.
Yeah.
Because, it's a huge potential. The ability to use that potential is a completely different thing. And also, if we do want to use some types of potential resources or not, like all the discussions with the seabed mining, yes, we have a very large EEZ and probably not that large capacity to exploit it. Still, that shouldn't hinder that we think about the use, that we plan the use, that we try to understand the impacts and the conflicts and avoid them and properly plan. Because Charles Ehler, that I mentioned earlier, he has a short article about the 10 myths of marine spatial planning, and one of them is that marine spatial planning should only take place when there are conflicts. And he argues that that is absolutely not true. The ideal time to start planning is when you don't have anything in place and you can anticipate the conflicts and avoid them and avoid the pressures. And so I think that's what we need to do. Yes, we have a big area that we are not able to use yet, maybe we will never use some parts in the future at all, but still we need to think about it. We need to create strategies and visions, and we ensure that if it comes a day when we do have the ability to use it, we thought about it. We have plans for that. We have a vision, and so on.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, definitely.
Thank you. So yeah, we'll do 2 questions more before we finish up, exactly for the reason that Anna was saying. So thank you very much already to all the participants who submitted questions. So Sasha asks about climate change. I don't know how to pronounce it in English, refugia. Because I don't see them effective if there is not an evaluation of connectivity among these refugia. There has to exist a large monetization system. Would that be feasible economically?
I don't know.
Yeah, further studies needed.
Yes, they need to be integrated. It's a bit like the protected areas. You cannot have one protected area and then that's it. You have to have a network. You have to take into account the connectivity. And climate refugia is more or less the same, I think. You cannot look at it as one specific closed place. You have to take into account everything that is around. And I'm not sure if there's the means to do that, or if it's economically feasible or not. It will depend also on the context, on the country that is doing that, if it has those resources or not. But that's the issue of monitoring marine areas in general, to have proper information to then make decisions.
Mm-hmm.
Great. So just let me tell you, because we had limited time, we were jumping off the comments with congratulations to you for your presentations, but we had several of them. I think you were able to see them, but just to let you know that people were very happy with your presentation, which was quite enlightening. And to finish, this was completely random, but it's a really good question for us to finish this webinar. And Victor is asking, in a broad sense, what kind of characteristics do you think that institutions of tomorrow would need to be able to manage an increasing changing marine environment? And he thanks us quite a lot for making this meeting space possible.
Thank you for those words. Well, institutions of tomorrow would need to be able to ensure adaptive capacity, communication among actors for sure, collaboration among institutions as well, and having a systemic view, a comprehensive view of what we are doing, of the place that we are managing, or of the actors that are involved, of the resources that can be used and those need to be protected. So to have that global view where we consider all the sectors and all the actors, to be able to put them communicating with each other, and to being able to adapt to challenges. And I think that would be the most important thing. But that's
the dream, no?
Yeah.
That's the dream, yeah.
But we have to dream to get there.
That's the dream, yeah, it's true. So I think we can finish, and you still have 11 minutes until your next lecture. Thanks a lot, Catarina, again, for making the time to talk to us about this. It was really great. We were recording this session. We are going to send it to everyone that registered and that was not able to come. And we will also share Catarina's email in case any of the participants want to talk to her a bit more about this subject. And I think that's it. And keep an eye in our social media. That's what you're going to say, no, Nick? It was.
Actually, no, but that's a good point.
Yeah, keep an eye on our social media because it seems that we are going to stay home for quite a while still. So we are going to have more events like this, and we hope everybody can make it, even though we are a bit tired of Zoom and screening time and everything. But I think it's always a good chance for us to get to know other types of projects and other types of papers, and it's always a pleasure for us. So thanks a lot, Catarina, and thank you everyone that attended.
Thank you. The last thing I was going to say is, Catarina, feel free to leave us the link for the survey, because we can send it separately in the text, so it's going to be a more direct way for the participants here to join in on your survey.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for having me here.
Thanks to you. Bye. And thanks to all the participants. Obrigado. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.